Welcome to this episode of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. I am your host, Olga Peters, and I would like to welcome to the show today Representative Emily Kornheiser. Hello, Emily.
Hello, Olga.
And Representative Theresa Wood. Welcome, Theresa.
Thank you, Olga.
And today we are talking about Act 156, which was passed last session. You remember that session that never ended, everyone? And it's known as the Older Vermonters Act, and it lays out a number of guidelines on how to support older Vermonters, as not just support them in their homes, but also the services to wrap around them to protect their health and their well-being and their financial security. Theresa is the chair of the Human Services Committee and Vice Chair. Sorry, thank you. I even wrote it down and I'm staring at it.
That's okay. Just don't let Representative Pugh know. That's all.
No, we won't tell. And Daniel Noyes, who will be joining us later on the show, also worked on this bill. So I'm curious, Theresa, I would love to hear from you about why this bill even came to fruition in the first place.
That's a really good, question. And I can tell you that primarily, this is my 6th year in the legislature, and in the Human Services Committee, and I've been in the Human Services Committee for 5 years, the bulk of the conversation is around Vermonters who struggle economically and children. And we generally don't, or haven't in the past, is what I should say, haven't in the past talked a lot about older Vermonters, their needs, their contributions, their place in our community. And Representative Noyes and Representative Noyes also sits on the Human Services Committee. And I should, by way of disclosure, let people know that I was the former Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Disabilities, Aging, and Independent Living. So I have a background in this professionally and spent most of my time in disability and aging services. So it just became really apparent as I spent time on our committee that we needed to have a focus on older Vermonters, and we needed to put in place something that would provide our state policy with regard to what older Vermonters should expect from the state of Vermont. And because there was nothing in state policy prior to this regarding that. And we wanted it to be clear. We used a deliberative process. So there was a bill that preceded this act. That was the bill that created the Older Vermonters Working Group. And for a period of 18 months or so, there was a group of people interested in the topic. So everything from legal aid to our area agencies on aging, to home health agencies, to the Department of Disabilities, Aging, and Independent Living. Representative Noyes and I participated. So there was a wide swath of interested individuals to come up with the basic tenets of what this what now is known as the Older Vermonters Act 156, what it should contain. And so it was a lengthy process, but one that resulted in something that I think gives us an opportunity to focus not only on the needs of older Vermonters, but on their contributions to our communities.
Yeah, for the sake of our listeners and viewers, I just want to quickly, in broad strokes, talk about some of the systems of support that this bill lays out. It talks about self-determination, so that older Vermonters can direct their aging rather than just be something that happens to them, which I thought was a very powerful statement. Mm-hmm. Safety and protection, living in their own home, having a safe home, a safe community. Coordinated and efficient systems of service, financial security, optimal health and wellness, social connection engagement, housing, transportation, and community design, and family caregiver support were just some of the things that this bill lays out. And to me, that was very comprehensive. to consider not just the elders, but their families as well. And
I was just going to say, Olga, one of the things that we know is that the majority of older Vermonters, when they sort of get to the stage in their life where they might need some additional support, that is done mostly by family caregivers. There's a very small slice of people who actually seek out what we refer to as long-term care services and supports. So that's why it's really important to acknowledge the role of family support caregivers. Yeah, all of those things that you just identified, those are basic principles. They are now policy of the state of Vermont, that these principles will guide the services and supports for older Vermonters and their families.
And sorry.
I appreciate it so much that you did this, because I feel like it really flips the script in a lot of ways. In my first 2 years in the legislature, the only time I heard people talking about older Vermonters was as this economic liability. And the solution in sort of the conversation that people seem to be having broadly was to attract more younger Vermonters to the state, rather than thinking about the incredible benefits and needs that older Vermonters bring as we age. And so I appreciate so much that you took that conversation and you moved with it to a place where we're really thinking about sort of the community that we do have and what that community needs.
Absolutely, Emily. It was one of the things that drove me nuts. I'll be perfectly honest. Anytime somebody spoke about older Vermonters or the aging of our state, or Vermont being the second oldest state in the country, it was like with such dread and doom and gloom, and always speaking of older Vermonters as this burden on our society and on our communities, and without the recognition that older Vermonters play such a vital role in the social connectedness of our communities, in the economic stability of our communities. I mean, people are working longer and longer, into their 60s, 70s, 80s, and being very viable employees, for the workforce that we continually hear about in our discussions around the economy in the state. So that was one of the goals that Representative Noyes and I had, was to start changing that that picture of what an older Vermonter is and needs, and started also thinking about their contributions and their successes in our communities. Olga, we interrupted you. Sorry, you were going to say something.
No, I just wanted to get a pulse on this bill, because it was passed in the fall, and it does lay out some timelines. I'm wondering kind of where in the process, because while this was passed last year, it's still a fairly new bill, or a new act, I should say.
Yes, it is. And the biggest thing is that we wanted people to be able to take their time in putting together a thoughtful process. So the other thing that I want to point out in this is, while sort of in legislative speak, it would be logical that we would say to the Department of Disabilities, Aging, and Independent Living, you will be the lead on this, because they provide services and supports. However, I think it was important for us to say that we placed sort of the onus of responsibility here at the governor's office, because we wanted it to be broad across all departments in state government. So when you're thinking about transportation, you're thinking about how is this going to impact older Vermonters, or how are we building our sidewalks? When you're thinking about broadband, how is that going to affect telemedicine for the 85-year-old that lives up in the Northeast Kingdom? Or when you're thinking about other government services, or you're thinking about trails, money to put into trails, are we thinking about making them accessible, or at least a portion of them accessible? All those different things that we think about in the legislature, we wanted state government to think about those as well, in terms of the broadness of the impact here, and not just in state government. We want this goes beyond state government to philanthropy and to the private sector. So the Secretary of Administration is actually charged with preparing this plan. And of course, operationally, the Department of Disabilities, Aging, and Independent Living has a main focus, along with the Vermont Department of Health. So they're just in the process now of putting together sort of the actual time frame that they will, the implementation of this. And there are other aspects of the bill that I'm sure we'll get into in terms of protection as we talk further. But so I just want to have an opportunity here to welcome my colleague, Representative Noyes.
Yes, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm sorry I was late. I actually was presenting with Representative Rogers to the 7th grade class. And it was great. They had some great questions. And so, yeah, always good to connect with our youngest constituents. So it was good.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Representative Daniel Noyes.
Thanks. Nice to meet you as well. Thanks for having us, or having me. And
so right before you came on, I was asking Theresa how this bill came to be, or how this act came to be. I'm not used to talking about things that have actually passed. We're usually talking about things that are pending. And I'm wondering for you, Dan, what's important about this bill for you?
I think what's the one thing about this bill is that we brought all the advocates, all of the people working together that provide services to older Vermonters involved with the policy. We brought them all together and we said, how do we craft kind of a big picture of how the state should work to make sure that older Vermonters have the services they need, that they have access to care, that broadband, and that was the neatest thing, was that, there were people from the Department of Health, there was people from the AG's office, from home health, transportation providers, and we met for over a year, and we really kind of tried to craft this kind of big picture. What's important? How does it all work together? And just bringing all those people together and having that unity. And sure, there's stuff that was not in the bill that some people wanted, and there was, it was really great democracy and good give and take by everybody who's involved. So I thought that was kind of the neatest thing about how we got to where we did, and the participation at that level. And then when we got it into committee, there was some work that needed to be done, and we moved around a bunch of stuff, but largely it was we had done a lot of work before, and I Theresa did amazing work there and bringing it all together. So lucky to be part of that process.
Can I highlight something about that? Because I think we have an ongoing conversation on this show over the last few years about sometimes working groups are a really great way to kick the can down the road and never do anything. And I think most of our constituents perceive them that way, but often we use them as a way to make like really difficult, comprehensive, meaningful decisions and conversations that we don't have the time to do within the legislative process. And so they're often the very best way to get a difficult piece of legislation passed. And so I just want to highlight this as an example of when a working group did the work and made it happen.
Yeah,
that's so right, Emily, because if on a piece as comprehensive as this, that we wouldn't have been able to spend the amount of time in committee to be able to hammer out, things like the principles, to put principles in state government about what older Vermonters and their families should expect. So they had to come from really the grassroots level of being able to put those things down to paper and have people agree on it. And oftentimes, like you said, these working groups, there's a perception, that it's, trying to appease somebody, or it's a report that's going to get put on a shelf someplace. But oftentimes what really ends up happening is it's sort of the beginning of a conversation that in the legislature takes sometimes several years in order for something to actually be achieved. And, that was the case with this.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear from you, Emily. Here in Windham County, we tell that story a lot about how we're one of the oldest counties in the state and we need to attract more young people. Has working on this bill, or even just working with your constituents, what stories are you seeing play out? And, are any of them true? Do any of them need to go? Share that with us.
Everyone says we're the oldest county in the oldest state. That's definitely something that I heard even before I ran for office. And again,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, even as I said earlier, we also have the most nonprofits per capita as a county in this country. So that's, and there's some synergy there, right? So, but as I sort of think about what that means for the vibrancy of our community, especially in the context of COVID, there's really, profound spirit of volunteerism in our community because of how many older Vermonters we have, how many people who have been in this community for a really long time, have deep social ties to each other and to younger people into the community and to the institutions in the community, and are carrying things forward and able to sort of offer that up to younger generations who might not have the time and space to do that kind of volunteering. And so there's those benefits. And then there's also some of the challenges that I think we're going to be facing. We have a lot of folks who are living in the houses that they raised their kids in that are too big and too drafty. And there isn't really sort of the other housing solution available in our area right now for people. And so we have a lot of people sort of in homes that are too big and too difficult for them. And so I think that's sort of a policy solution that I am thinking about in this context, which isn't a problem. It's just sort of a thing that's happening in our community, because we also have a lot of families that are in houses that are way too small for them, that want to move into a bigger house. There's what Theresa said about sort of roads and sidewalks. I think that's a real ongoing conversation in our community, is sort of how we care for our sidewalks and what accessibility looks like for them, especially in the in the winter. And we talk about that in the context of bicycles usually, but we really need to be talking about it in the context of accessibility more broadly. And then particularly in West Brattleboro, Mountain Home has a huge proportion of older Vermonters living in it because it is a really affordable place for people to live and live independently, somewhere that is sort of maintainable and, folks can connect and access. And so really doing everything we can to sort of strengthen access to social services there and strengthen access between sort of somewhere that's down a dirt road and this sort of core center of town where so much is available, I think. And I see all of the threads of all of those things in the Older Vermonters Act. And I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, housing is definitely something that, we're really going to need to be working on over the next few years. And it's about housing in people's own communities. It's not, if you look at someone who lives up on East Hill in Wolcott, the town I live in, if you told them, hey, there's this great housing unit that, would be a really good place for you, but it's in Stowe, that's not where their social connections are. Their social connections are in Wolcott. And so we need to, we really need to be thinking about how do we make sure that we have affordable, accessible housing in people's communities where they have their social connections, because, that's going to make it a lot easier to move out of an existing home and into something that's more manageable, but still, be in a familiar setting.
Mm-hmm. Very good point. We tend to undervalue, I think, sometimes social connections, and they really are part of all of our well-being and mental health. I want to talk a little bit about financial security for a number of reasons, because Theresa brought up that great point about how people are often working later into life, and so they are part of our economic fabric. But there's also this interesting part about care and later in life for families as well. You know, they're part of the economic health of their elders. Can we talk about that balance of caring for families and caring for, you know, the elders at the same time?
Well, we certainly, no, I don't think any one of us is not familiar with sort of the sandwich generation who is, taking care of an older parent and, has teenagers or kids in college or even, younger children at this point in time. And that's a reality. I mean, those are things that families are dealing with. And I think that, when Emily was talking and Dan was talking about sort of the supportive services and some of the things contained in this act about self-determination and making sure that people have choices and don't feel like they're sort of pigeonholed into, oh, okay, this is the only thing that I know of. And I'll be honest with you, people in their 80s and 90s, when they think of long-term services and supports, they think of nursing homes. And Vermont has so many more options than that. And our Choices for Care program, well, I'm not going to say it's perfect, but it is, was a leader in the country and still is in providing options for those individuals who are eligible for Medicaid. And unfortunately, there's a lot of folks when they reach that stage of life that may have worked through their life savings and the only thing they have is Social Security. And, essentially that does make them eligible for Medicaid. So they do have access to things like, respite. So family caregivers can have support in the home. We have adult day programs, which frankly have undergone a great deal of stress during this pandemic times. But they provide, a full day of support for an older Vermonter living at home who needs supervision. And often that level of support enables the family members at home to be able to work and to go to their jobs or to tend to their other family members at home. So, when we think about, being able to support older Vermonters in the settings that they prefer, I've never really heard an older Vermonter say, I want to go to a nursing home. That's where I want to be. Some people, end up there, but, and they, don't get me wrong, they play a valuable role in our sort of continuum of services. But most people would prefer to be at home or with their families, or, in their home communities of some sort with the level of support. And Vermont does that better than any other place in the country.
Thank you. We have just about 5 minutes before the break. So I want to touch in with Dan and Emily to see if there's anything you want to leave listeners with before we hear from some of our underwriters.
Emily?
I want to sort of say, I think, Olga was touching on this idea of Vermonters sort of being able to afford the time and space to care for their loved ones. And that's something we talk about to some degree, with regards to childcare. And I think often when we talk about family medical leave and family medical leave insurance, the first conversation is about bonding. And it's not about care for older family members. And I think in the workplace, I've seen people really struggle to take leave to care for older family members, while in workplaces that absolutely accommodate care for children without a second thought. And so I think that's a really powerful both policy shift that we're making, but also sort of personal cultural shift that we need to be taking on. And as an only child, I think before we started, Olga said that she was an only child. As an only child of aging parents who both live out of state, it's something that I think about a lot. Like what is it going to look like when I need to, leave weeks at a time to go care for my parents? Who I hope.
My mom and I had a conversation a few years ago that was very important. She is in an assisted living facility because she has MS. And the conversation we had to have was, well, Mom, what choices do you want to make? Because there will come a time because of the MS, I won't be able to care for you. Like if you fall, I can't pick you up. It's as simple as that. And so she chose an assisted living facility, but it wasn't and I'm happy for her, and I'm glad she had that choice to make, and she made it when she could. But it's been an interesting process to watch, just for the family to go through that.
Mhm.
And to watch her move, and to watch her move to Medicaid, and what financial, what's left money for her own money to spend at the end of the month, because the state takes so much of her Social Security and that type of thing. Yeah, it's given me a new look on things, I guess I should say. And I'm stumbling because it's a process that's ongoing. I haven't come to the end of it, so I'm still learning. But they weren't easy choices. And unlike a child that you can say, you're going to do this because I'm the adult and I'm telling you, it's very interesting to have those conversations with your parents.
Yeah.
Sure. I'm glad you brought up paid family leave, Emily, because that really wasn't, I spoke about it on the floor when we were debating that bill. And it really is important to make sure that people understand that it's not only for a new family, it's for, caring for a loved one or your parents or your spouse or whatever. So a lot of times that gets lost a little bit, but it's there.
Thank you so much, Representative Daniel Noyes, Representative Theresa Wood, Representative Emily Kornheiser. We have to go to break and hear from some of our underwriters here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, but stay tuned. The Montpelier Happy Hour will return in a moment. Thank you. I'm ready. Welcome back to the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. If you're just joining us, I am your host, Emily Kornheiser, as well as Representative Theresa Wood and Representative Dan Noyes. Thank you so much for being here. We are talking about Older Vermonters and Act 156, known as the Older Vermonters Act. I would like to segue from the act a little bit, and let's talk about COVID and the impact it has had on our elders.
I'll start it off, but I'm sure we all have a boatload that we could say about that. I think that one of the things that actually really stood out to me the most, and that was really right around the time that we were working on this bill last year, and that was that the impact on older Vermonters in congregate care facilities, a nursing home, became evident right away, and that's where still primarily most of our deaths have come from, unfortunately. But we did not at the outset have a strategy specifically related to older Vermonters in congregate care. So, when we're talking, people were thinking about community spread, they were thinking about schools, they were thinking about, the legislature, we were thinking about workplaces. We were not thinking about in advance. Well, nobody was thinking in advance about COVID, but we were not thinking about at the time that we needed a specific strategy to prevent the illness and spread of the disease in nursing homes and other long-term care facilities at the outset. Of course, that needed to be developed very rapidly as it became apparent that one, how contagious this was, and two, that how our older population really succumbed to it at a much higher rate than people under the age of 75. So that became apparent. But one of the things that was really interesting to me is that at the very outset, we didn't have a specific strategy around people living in congregate care when we knew that it was a highly contagious virus. And so that, as I said, that changed quickly. And, Vermont now, does have among the lowest rates in congregate care, lowest rates of deaths in congregate care, although, as I said, most of our deaths have occurred there. So that's been a huge thing. I have a 90-year-old aunt who lives in an assisted living facility. And The other biggest thing I will say is the isolation that people have experienced. It's been dramatic. And although we keep in touch on the phone and occasional Facebook, Skyping, it's very difficult. That's very difficult on them. So Dan or Emily, you have thoughts about that?
Well, I think that isolation wasn't just limited to folks who are living in congregate care settings. I think that we've seen Vermonters across the state feeling, being incredibly isolated through this, and didn't necessarily have the resources and supports in place to bridge that really intense isolation, partly because of technology. And a lot of people, didn't yet have broadband, or didn't yet have the kind of IT skills that they would need to do the kind of endless Zooming that we all are doing with each other. And the sort of mutual support networks that I think developed after a while. The volunteerism in in at least my community, is really mostly older Vermonters who do it. And so the system of folks to bridge that isolation really broke down when we didn't have older Vermonters to be doing the visiting too. Even our Meals on Wheels is mostly older Vermonters who do the driving. And so that isolation, I think, has been really, really hard. And I appreciate how much people are doing to protect their own safety, but I think we need to continue to step up to care for those people who are taking care of their own safety.
One of the things that I've been really thinking about around that companionship piece and trying to look at technology, especially in rural Vermont, is there a possibility that we could use Medicaid to help pay for internet access, where we're trying to move into these CUDs, communication union districts? It'll be important for them to have the community buy-in, to have that mass in order to be able to run that fiber optic and to maintain a system. So I've been reaching out to our congressional delegation because it's not allowed. We have this thing called Lifeline where we can have a phone, but here we see during the pandemic that it's companionship and having that access to even register for a vaccine. If you don't have internet or a computer or the ability to use one, you have to rely on others to help you with that. And, I think as we generations age, we're going to have people that are going to be, they've been using computers for 10, 20 years, and then being able to pay for it, if we could possibly have that be a reimbursable expense for their, because telehealth, telemedicine, that companionship, as we just talked about, is all so important. So I've been talking to Senator Sanders' office about it. So we'll see. Hopefully we'll have some discussion about it this week. So, and I've been talking to our Energy and Technology Committee about it. So who knows where that will go.
I'm curious about, Emily. I always admire Emily because she is like a bureaucracy whisperer. And I get extremely frustrated very easily by bureaucracy. But one thing I find so fascinating is just trying to navigate it. And elders, it seems, they have so much bureaucracy to navigate. And if they're not doing it, their family members. I'm trying to schedule my dad's vaccine right now. A whole other story. And I wonder, is there any movements to try to simplify some of the hoops people have to jump through to access some of these services?
Well, I think you raise a good question, Olga. That's when we were talking back earlier about accessibility, it's not just about physical accessibility of, our buildings and our streets and our public places. It's really about digital accessibility and governmental accessibility. I mean, one of the things that I say to my constituents all the time is that, I'm if you're having problems, I'm the link, to try to help you get through those issues. And we certainly saw, more than I've ever seen before when people were needing to and continuing to need to now apply for unemployment. But one of the things I just want to make sure that your listeners and viewers get is the senior helpline number, because that is something that people can reach out to for information and assistance. And that is 1-800-642-5119. And so when people are like at their wits' end and trying to figure that out, and family caregivers can call too. So you don't need to be the older Vermonter yourself. The family caregiver can call and say, you know, I need help with trying to figure this out. You know, that's what they're there for. And it's also there for people with disabilities as well, to be able to access. I can't say we've made great strides in that, Olga. I mean, I would love to be able to say that, but we're trying to make things accessible all the way around in terms of people who have English as their second language, and people who you know, don't have access to technology, and people who even, you know, with assistance just find it difficult to access, you know, the barrage of services that there are out there and all the information that you have to give in order to get access to them. So it's not easy. You know, well, it'll be a continued work in progress.
I'm glad you knew that phone number, Theresa. It's
well,
I was
Dan,
about to start looking it up, and you had it. I love it. You know,
I pulled it up on my screen, but you know, don't give me too much credit.
Oh, good.
and I will put it in the podcast show notes.
All right,
Okay.
perfect. No, and you know, working with the area agencies on aging or home health, and having a case manager, or if you're working with SASH or whoever, you know, those are really good advocates. And then, you know, rely on your representatives.
What does SASH stand? Dan, we're using acronyms. What is SASH?
Oh, sorry. Services and Supports at Home. So it's like the area agencies on aging and home health, and just a way for people to receive supports and services, as in the name. So, you know, just and like you know, also reach out to us, your legislators, if you have a problem, because you know, that's our job, and usually it's really easy. Shouldn't say really easy. Sometimes it's still frustrating, but I've had some really good success just saying, oh yeah, I can help you with that, you know, and one email or one phone call, and it's taken care of. And just because I've kind of tried to navigate it for others, and I got it down now. So. Yeah.
That senior helpline, though, is really amazing. I think as we have sort of less and less ombuds positions throughout our state government, and our forms become more and more complicated, it is just so powerful, that senior helpline. I mean, I remember when I worked at economic services and someone would call, and they would, when I heard that they were old enough to be calling the senior helpline, I was so excited, because I needed so much better help than anyone like throughout the economic services system could to navigate, especially Medicare. I think they're really brilliant at helping people understand.
I was just going to say that when it comes to open enrollment time, and you are in a position where you have to choose, you know, a Medicare supplemental plan, or you're in the position that you want to do that, or a prescription plan, that they are invaluable when it comes to that. It is, yeah, they're the ones who know that hands down.
And for the record, I would just like to say, I do not want Medicare for all. I want Medicaid for all. Medicare is confusing to no end, with layers of outside expenses for people. Medicaid is like tidy and straightforward and understandable and covers most things. So I just, you know, for the record, I understand that Medicare has a nicer branding around it, but Medicaid for all is my goal.
Well, Medicaid, you know, has the ability for the state to personalize what it wants to do in your state, in our state.
Yeah.
Because Medicaid is a state federal cooperative program, which would be one reason why the state would not want that. Representative Kornheiser.
Hint, hint. So can segue a little bit. During the break, Theresa, you mentioned the issue of self-neglect for that many elders might experience. And there's a working group focused on that issue right now. Could you give us a little background on that?
Sure. Well, just to take one step backward, Vermont has, as do probably all other states, an adult protection statute that essentially, if any of us witness, somebody being abused, whether it's financial exploitation or whether it's, physical or mental abuse or any of those kinds of things, verbal abuse, we have a division of licensing and protection within the Department of Disabilities, Aging, and Independent Living that investigates those things. And that division is often charged with needing to figure out what to do with people like, you or I, who might call and, we know of somebody, downtown who really is living, in a situation that, or that's not good. And a local health officer has called you or, something like that, and they're concerned about that person. Yet that person is they're their own guardian. They have family members, perhaps even, but they seem to be neglecting sort of their basic physical health, their food, clothing, shelter, those kinds of things. This is a sticky wicket, I can tell you that, because lots of people will say that's what this is the way they prefer to live. They don't want anybody's help. They don't want anybody's interference. So we have a working group that was in the Older Vermonters Act, set up over the next year and a half or so to come to the legislature with any recommendations for changes in our adult abuse and protection laws. They need that time in order to be able to really fully vet what other states are doing, what we're seeing as national trends, and to try to figure out, is there a Vermont solution for this? Right now, we do not address self-neglect in our adult abuse statutes. It has been discussed many times, and of course, personal liberties come into this, and people's legal rights. And especially if you're deemed competent, and you choose to live in a certain way, even though it might not be the way that sort of society thinks that you ought to be taking care of yourself. Those are the kind of really sticky issues that you get into about that. But there is a working group to try to sort of hammer that out and to come back with us with recommendations or not. I mean, they may determine that this is something that we do not want to address in state statute, but there are a number of other states who have addressed it. And, I'm feeling like Vermont needs to do something. I just don't know what that something is yet.
Yeah, I know that's an issue that's come up a lot in our town, and that our town health officer often calls our homeless services agency to ask them to be sort of communication intermediaries in issues of someone whose sort of perceived self-neglect is leading to something that the neighbors can even see with regards to the housing. And maybe that, often that involves some sort of rodents. But it's absolutely not sort of the purview of the homeless services agency. This person is fully housed, and they're just considered like people who are good at having difficult conversations with people. And so that's why they're being called. Yes. But it seems like in addition to some real civil liberties issues, there's also just sort of a service gap there that we might be able to go a little way towards filling. Or maybe it's just helping our health officers be better trained in having those kinds of difficult conversations. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that sometimes people, I can think of an example right here in my community of a lady who was really known to everybody, and she was fully housed. She fed her animals better than she fed herself, and she really didn't have a lot of social skills. And long story short, she fell and broke her hip in the last 6 months or so. And everybody was like, where is she? Where, because we always would see her on the street. Where is she? Where is she? And so finally, a neighbor who wasn't sort of connected on Front Porch Forum realized that there was this conversation going on Front Porch Forum. And he chimed in and he said, oh, he updated us on her status. She'd had an operation. She was in rehab, but she was going to stay there, and she was doing great. And in fact, it was really kind of cool because she received this, whole bunch of holiday cards and people sending her things at the rehab place. And he, posted a picture in our local digital newsletter of her, and she looked better than she had in the last 30 years. So with a smile on her face and everything. So, but she was a person who would have fallen into this category of somebody who was self-neglecting and did not want anybody's help. But finally, when she got to that point of she was not able to physically get up and get to the doctor and call the ambulance and all of that kind of stuff, she accepted help, and she honestly, I think, is really much happier now. So we do make a lot of assumptions, I think, as community members about whether or not somebody wants help or doesn't want help. And it is a difficult needle to thread, I will say.
What this stands out for me, and just for the sake of listeners, as you may know, I live in an apartment building, and something is now a gathering is happening in the next door apartment. So if you hear noise, I apologize. What this strikes for me is, people's lives are becoming more complicated, and their needs are becoming more complicated, regardless of whether they're a child or an elder, or mental health issues or physical health issues. And it seems like we are sometimes expecting neighbors and community members and family members to sometimes maybe step in where it's more appropriate for a social service agency to step in, kind of going back to what Emily said about difficult conversations. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but I do just want to acknowledge that as things become more complicated, there is more being expected of the community. And either we need to better support the community so it can step up, or we need to step up our agencies. I don't know. What are your responses to that?
Well, I'm thinking about 2 weeks ago, we had a conversation about intimate partner violence with the Vermont Network on Domestic Violence, and about this, and about our local domestic violence shelter, the Women's Freedom Center, about bystander training. And I think that there's a lot to be said for the fact that many of us, especially, as Vermont communities are really ever changing in their makeup, and as less people might know each other from their kids' schools, that we really need to be supported in knowing what to do, and how to talk to our neighbors in some cases, or how to care for each other, or, how, as we become more culturally and ethnically and generationally diverse, I think some of us just really need the skills of how to offer help to someone in a way that doesn't feel like an imposition, or how to step in when you see that someone is really struggling, and without sort of hurting their pride. And all of those things are very possible conversations to have. And I think all of us are very comfortable having them in like our very individual family cultural contexts. But when you're going between cultural contexts, I think it gets a lot harder. And I think that's maybe where we all could use some help with both, younger Vermonters and older Vermonters and people in all kinds of different situations. But many of us want to live here because of the incredible community ties we have. And so I want us to keep on investing in those community ties.
Yeah, I so agree with you, Emily. Vermont has got, the most nonprofits per capita in the country. And I think, I'm not sure that we need more of those. I think that, I really resonate with what you just said. A lot of people live here because they like the community connectedness that we have. I mean, everything from Dan, I remember you telling stories about, the wood, the trees that had fallen down beside the road, and getting a bunch of people to cut up those trees for firewood, and people would just come take the firewood. That was a great community service that you guys did up there in your neck of the woods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that wood bank has been really, really successful over the years. So just being able to engage the community in service, and a lot of community service is just having somebody help, direct people, say, okay, this person needs a wheelchair ramp and I got all the wood, so let's put this thing together. Or, people are going to be cold unless we figure out a way to get this firewood cut up and split and delivered, and people will step up. It's kind of one of the neat things about living here is that people will volunteer their time, one of the most valuable assets they have, to come up and help others in the community. And then to your point, you were talking about earlier about, working with people that need services. Sometimes those services just aren't available. So when if somebody, their house is falling apart, it's like, okay, we don't have the financial ability to go in and put a new roof on it or whatever, but what we have to do is figure out, okay, then is there another place that individual could live? Or if it's accessibility for the home because the bedrooms are on the second floor, and how do you make that work? Or the door to the bathroom is only 28 inches wide or whatever, and a person needs to be able to get through with a walker or a wheelchair. So a lot of that work is expensive and hard to get done. So
thank you, everyone. We have just a few minutes left, and so I want to touch base with Theresa and Dan specifically. Is there anything you want to leave listeners with before we end today's show?
Well, one of the things that I did want to touch on just briefly is the mental health and substance use by older Vermonters. We tend to think about substance use or misuse as something that affects, younger people, but there is a significant portion of older Vermonters that have a substance misuse issue. And so that is something that our health department is paying particular attention to. And we, of course, are doing that in our committee. So I just wanted to bring that up because people don't ordinarily think of, people in that age bracket as having a substance use issue. And just as a reminder to people that alcohol still in Vermont is the number one substance that people have an issue with. We hear a lot about opioids, and that certainly is an issue, and it's certainly devastating. But alcohol, we are reminded of that frequently by a Vermont Department of Health, that alcohol is still the number one substance that is misused extensively by people in all age categories. So I just did want to bring that up as a highlight of something that is an issue that we do struggle with here in Vermont.
And it could be one of the reasons that Vermont is so high in our falls, number of people who are injured from falls. And so it keeps circling back around, with older Vermonters. One thing I would like to bring up is if people want to continue with this conversation or hear about what we're talking about, every Wednesday at noon, we have the Older Vermonters Caucus, where we bring legislators together along with advocates and have a different topic each week. And that's put out on YouTube, so you can catch different ones. We've had the commissioner Commissioner Hutt, who's moving to being our, I'm not exactly sure what's her title again. It's the
Chief Prevention Officer.
Chief Prevention Officer in the Department of the Administration. So a good move for older Vermonters around substance use. She'll be a big advocate. She's a great person. And as I was saying, This week we have our congressional delegation this Wednesday. So it's a different topic each week that we bring people in to talk to legislators about, and we talk about legislation that's moving or needs to move within the House. So.
And just a reminder for folks to sign up for their vaccines if they so desire. Vermont is actually, Vermonters have been very anxious to get their vaccines. And that's been a topic, of course, of great controversy as well in terms of how Vermont has, laid out the bans for the age bans for access to vaccines. But we're closing in on 90% of those folks 75 and older who have registered and or received their at least one dose of their vaccine. So that's great. And now the age band this week has moved down to 70 and above. So that is something for your listeners and viewers to think about in terms of access. And then after that age band is done, then my understanding is going to be open. It's going to be wide open. Which is a little bit different than what they were talking about a couple of weeks ago. So that's something to keep in mind for people who want to, get as much protection as they think that they can.
One thing I've really appreciated about Vermont's approach to vaccine rollout, which is I certainly have my disagreements with, but that the bands were narrow enough that everyone in those bands was able to get an appointment for a vaccine when that band was open, which is very different from many other states that might have had much wider bands of eligibility, but it became very much like a race to the bottom to get an appointment. And I think there was a lot of people that were left out of that process. And so I am glad that as we open up the vaccines, we're really open, everyone who wants an appointment can get one. And if people are having any trouble making an appointment, whether that's because bureaucracy makes them feel a little too wild to sit on the phone long enough, or for any other challenges, really, both the senior helpline can help people get signed up, or I'm happy to help people get signed up. But lots of options for it. There is the online option, but there is also a phone number available.
Yes. And I do want to point out, this is something I've had to explain to many a person around that age banding, is that approach, Vermont only signed up the number of people that they could guarantee that there was a second dose for. For both the vaccines that we have available right now require a second dose. Other states had opened it wide up, and they were not guaranteeing that they were going to have a second dose when that, third week came around and that person was supposed to have their second dose. And, while I don't think it's been perfect, I think the ability to know that you leave your first dose, you leave your first shot with an appointment for your second shot here in Vermont. And that is not the way it's happening in other parts of the country. So I think while people have certainly had their issues with the prioritization, that is one thing that I do have appreciated.
Thank you. We are out of time here on the Montpelier Happy Hour on WVEW 107.7. But before we go, I do want to, we always like to end with a toast. And my big water thing here.
And my teacup.
And your teacup. I just want to toast to all the elders who are out there volunteering in our communities, who are caring for their grandchildren, and who, if we are lucky, we will someday be ourselves. So hear, hear to all our elders. Just a reminder, you can find the Happy Hour at our Montpelier Happy Hour Facebook page on WVEW 107.7, as well as Emily's YouTube channel. And thank you, everybody. Have a great week.